Hey, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Heidi Gardner, who's a distinguished fellow at Harvard Law School, author of two best-selling books, Smart Collaboration and Smarter Collaboration. Heidi, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Richard. I'm really pleased to be here.
So, Heidi, it's so good to see you again. As you may recall, you came and spoke at my former law firm's partnership retreat, Sherman Sterling, many, many years ago. I had forgotten it, but I'm super glad that you were able to join me.
Oh, and I'm sure as soon as we start talking, it will all come flooding back, right?
Of course, of course. So, Heidi, tell me a little bit about how you, obviously, your area of expertise is in collaboration. How did that come about? How did you become, an expert in that area, or choose that to be your area of research?
In some ways, I feel like it picked me. There's lots of backstory to this, but one of the defining moments was when I was at McKinsey and was able to compare two teams that I was working with. I was leading two different teams, and they were both equally phenomenal in terms of the members. We had a concert pianist and an astrophysicist and somebody, former military veteran, whatever. And, that team was on fire. We created something that was innovative and powerful, and the client loved it, and we had a ball. And then, sort of same, ostensibly same quality team, same diversity, different kinds of backgrounds, but still very diverse. And that team was like, meh, it was like fine. We did solid work, but I think our big breakthrough was like a 2x2 matrix. I was thinking, really? That doesn't feel like it's cooking the same way.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the leader, right? I was the leader on both of them. There was no discernible differences. And I kept observing this, that we couldn't quite explain why some teams really lit up and other teams just failed to use the full complement of what the potential was there. And we were so busy solving clients' problems that I didn't have a lot of time to noodle on this. And nor did I have a big enough data set. And so, being the nerd that I am, I decided to go back and pursue that question. Why are some teams so much more effective at using everything that their members bring to the table, and others just aren't? And I left McKinsey. I went back for a PhD. I'd done my first master's at the London School of Economics. I did my second master's at the London Business School and my PhD there. And then I joined Harvard University. And in essence, I started teaching about this. With my background in professional service firms, I landed teaching not only the core organizational behavior class and leadership to our MBA students, but starting my very first year, which is quite unusual at Harvard, teaching one of our flagship programs, which was leading professional service firms at Harvard Business School. And that challenged me enormously because people kept asking me these questions like, yeah, it's one thing to study teams like you did, client service teams. But what I really am vexed by is, how do you get the top of each of those teams to work together? In other words, how do you get partners to work together?
Well, you have me on bated breath. What is the answer to the question that you when you
So, the answer is it's complicated, right? One of the things that I found in my dissertation research, I had the privilege of working with hundreds of teams across an array of professional service firms, many, many hundreds of people, and they let me come in and crawl around. I collected all kinds of survey data, the beginning, middle, and end of the projects. I surveyed their clients. I actually captured audio and visual recordings of team meetings. And through that really fine-grained data and lots of different analytical lenses, one of the things that we found out very clearly is that the degree of performance pressure that a team is under, not time pressure, but really the scrutiny, the importance of the issue they were working on, to some degree, how much somebody's career or progression hinged on the outcome, just that real sense of being under the gun, that affected how people interacted with each other, the degree to which they were open to discussion and debate, or really kind of latched onto the first plausible outcome. And those ways of interacting that were affected deeply by pressure created the kind of team dynamic that really failed to leverage and energize those team members.
So pressure, it has the opposite effect. It hinders the collaboration.
It hinders collaboration. Yeah. So teams generally speaking, right? There are some teams, and this is where leadership plays an enormous role. There are some teams where the leader has just the right balance of absorbing some of the pressure from above or the pressure from clients and passing on just enough to really energize the team. They know how important this is. They feel like they're really part of something big and meaningful and meaty.
Hmm.
But the leader won't pass on so much pressure that it becomes debilitating,
Yeah.
or dysfunctional. So leadership really makes a big difference. And in some of those teams, you had leaders really stepping up and playing that right kind of role, motivating and energizing teams as opposed to creating the environment where people had to really play it safe.
Interesting. Now, did that ever solve your initial observation going back to your first thing? Did you ever kind of figure out what caused those two teams to be different? The one you
Yeah, I did. I mean, I could, again, I didn't have data. And there's always, a lot of bias comes in retrospective analysis and looking at one's own leadership. But I could see in some of those instances, it did have, my responsibility and my fingerprints all over it. I could see in some teams I was more stressed than others. Um, I certainly saw in some of those teams that the partner was more stressed, and that created, when my fellow partners were really stressed about their relationship with the client and things, that made a difference. And I also think that when we have true diversity in a team, there is a lot of there's a lot of responsibility for everyone on the team to create and uphold a context where those differences can be unearthed and used to advantage. I had the opportunity to work for a year in South Africa. And in my teams there, I rarely had two people from the same nationality or country. And there, I mean, it wildly diverse, and it was very expected. South Africa alone has 13 national languages. And so, in that context, we had people coming from all over the world to work, and it was expected that people would be really different from one another. And it creates the idea inside a team that we're going to look for what's different and use that to full effect. Whereas, some of the teams were far more superficially homogenous, and we failed to get underneath that surface homogeneity and find out where those real differences made an important positive impact on the kinds of decisions we were encountering.
Well, other than leadership, which you kind of mentioned as being very important, sort of applying the right amount of pressure, what are some of the other factors that may be less, less critical, but also important to ensure really good collaboration?
So when we think about collaboration, I want to be very clear. We're not just talking about pulling any old team together. The smarter part of smarter collaboration is being hyper intentional about what is it that we're trying to accomplish collectively that we couldn't do on our own, and whose expertise, whose life experiences, whose whatever is going to be essential. Like, that's the smarter part, is being very, very intentional about who's collaborating with whom and for what end. And I think in some instances, we've collected data from, millions of data records across all kinds of organizations globally, et cetera, et cetera. And, right before this call, I was crunching data from a big, primarily US-based law firm. And we asked hundreds of their partners, and in this case, associates, what were the barriers to collaboration. And what we find, Richard, again and again and again, is that the same, call it 5 or 6 barriers, emerge in organizations, be they publicly traded companies or law firms or nonprofits, but the order of magnitude is really different, right? And in this instance, you had a firm that has grown through a series of mergers. And what you end up with is a lack of competence trust. So the firm has grown quickly. Everyone knows that, they're from the legacy firm A, legacy firm B. Kind of by definition, half the people are below average. We just don't know which ones. So I'm not going to reach out to anyone over there until I have a very strong belief in their capabilities. They're going to deliver high quality, on time, on budget. They're going to treat my clients the way my clients expect to be treated, all those client handling skills. And so in this instance, competence trust is a major barrier.
Mm.
We don't have any evidence there that things have actually blown up, but it's the what if factor, and the not knowing each other's confidence and having full belief in it that they're willing to dive in. So competence trust often stands in the way. And again, that is relatively typical in firms that have grown up through mergers because of that lack of familiarity and so forth. We worked with a firm very recently where interpersonal trust was far and away the biggest problem. They had been through a bruising battle for leadership, et cetera. And there were very clear camps. There were factions. People did not believe that others were in a collaboration for the right reasons. They were worried that somebody was going to steal credit or take their ideas, or God forbid, even walk out the door with a client relationship. That level of interpersonal distrust meant that there was virtually zero collaboration happening except within tiny little pockets.
Mm.
Sometimes it's more structural. I mean, nobody will be surprised to hear that the comp system in some firms plays against collaboration.
Yeah, yeah. So
No, and that's
how
usually
do you,
problematic.
yeah, how do you so the trust problem? I mean, obviously that's very important. I mean, law firms, any professional services for, well, actually, it's very broadly. How do you get over that? I mean, I can definitely see that being a problem. How does one overcome that? Is that just leadership role? Is that how does
It's
org?
got to be top down and bottom up, right? So there are many ways. Let's think about competence trust, because your remedy for fixing a competence trust problem is quite different than fixing an interpersonal trust one.
Sure.
So on the competence trust one, it's somewhat more straightforward because there are lots of ways that you can engineer opportunities for people to work together on low stakes projects,
Mm.
so that they don't have those performance pressure issues where they're going to stay in their box. They're going to open up to some degree and demonstrate through direct contact, direct work with somebody that that person, it does deliver high quality and that they've got great ideas and so forth. Those are often opportunities that law firms tend not to take advantage of. At McKinsey, where I was for 5 years, we had tremendous opportunity to work on non-client facing, but absolutely crucial work, thought leadership.
Mm.
And we would work with other people on developing a white paper or a client research initiative or something like that, and we could really see what somebody was made of, and that mattered because then when we were in a higher stakes client situation, we absolutely trusted their mettle.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So there are ways that leaders and firms can create, we call it a trust ladder. You're sort of climbing step by step by step with other people, and the firms can create those sorts of opportunities where people do that. I think there's also a big role here to play in referencing, and so getting people to widen their circle of trust by asking others, not continually going back to the usual suspect, but for a work opportunity, but rather going back to the usual suspect and saying, "Hey, Richard, we've worked together now 3 times. I'd love to work with you again, and I'd love to know somebody else who, in your practice, who I could take to client X."
Mm.
And you, Richard, in that situation, we hope would be firm-minded enough and forward-thinking enough to say, "Actually, I'm kind of building up a bench here. I've been coaching this senior associate. I can vouch for this person, give her a go." And that kind of referencing and pipeline building has to be not just encouraged, but with a pretty heavy hand, motivated from lots of different ways. And that has to happen within practice groups. It has to happen within offices. There has to be a true expectation that people do that.
Now, do you work with, I mean, you obviously work with a ton of law firms, but do you also work with non-law firms, technology companies? Give me a range of the kinds of organizations you work with.
Oh my goodness. So we work across the whole professional service firm spectrum. So lots of law firms, lots of consultancies, boutique consultancies, strategy consultancies, like some of the turnaround firms and those sorts of things, which are fascinating.
Mm.
We work with engineering, and we work with financial services, so private equity, asset managers.
Mm.
We also work, well outside, well, of course, corporates, right? So energy, consumer products, technology, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And so we work across a whole range of for-profit, but we are increasingly working through some of our partners with different kinds of non-commercial entities. So we are just starting to engage with a thousand person health and human services division at a state level. We've done extensive work with a huge land grant university. And so, yeah, we have the opportunity now to get in and work with organizations of a whole different set. And what's fascinating on the one hand is people are people.
Yeah.
Okay, so these trust issues emerge. They might not be fighting over origination credit, but
Yeah.
they might be fighting over some kind of credit, right? And the people are people, and yet it's very clear that the degree to which people identify with the mission of what they're trying to do, what their organization is trying to do, creates a huge amount of motivation and risk appetite to try working with other people if there's a chance that by you and I teaming up, we're going to beat this beast we call cancer.
Yeah.
Right? That kind of motivation takes precedence sometimes over the more selfish motives of who's going to get the billable hours credit.
Yeah. So that was my next question, which sounds like you sort of answered it. But basically, you're saying that these themes that you talk about really are the same in all the various different industries. Whether it's a law firm or professional services or private equity or nonprofit. You're saying that these themes are very much the same.
They're human, right? Because we're ultimately dealing with humans. Many of these are unearthed, time and time again. The context does matter, though. Leadership matters, the structure matters, the compensation system matters, and the strategy matters. And so there are enormous variations. Somebody just a couple of days ago dubbed it the Gardner delusional leader theorem, which I love now. I do have this this theorem or hypothesis, at least, that a lot of leaders in organizations are out of touch with the collaborative culture in their firm or their company. By the time somebody reaches a very senior level, there's for sure very, very high likelihood that they're high power, right? They've got control over resources and a whole, set of other things. There's a very good chance that they've got longer tenure in the organization, at least outside of the public company realm where CEOs tend to turn over quite quickly. But they'll have great networks. They'll have long-standing relationships with colleagues and things. And it means that their view of what stands in the way of collaboration and how much is very, very out of touch with somebody, say, a lateral partner or so forth. And so, when we're thinking about what stands in the way, the question is for whom? And how do we get beneath the hypotheses and really test them and find out, is there a difference by gender? Is there a difference by role? Is there a difference by office? Those are the kinds of things that we test because we've got data on them. And it allows us to take a much more objective, clear-eyed view of what stands in the way. And equally important, help us understand where's collaboration, smarter collaboration, really taking root and what's different there.
It sounds like a lot of the things you talk about are, rests on, leadership, making sure this happens. Why is your angle in terms of how you're approaching this, leadership? Why isn't your book called Smarter Leadership as opposed to collaboration? Like, why use that? Why use that as your entry point as opposed to sort of leadership, which seems like it drives, good collaboration?
But it's not only leadership, right? So what we focus on in Smarter Collaboration is, again, starting with what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Are you trying to tackle the highest value, most complex client issues, opportunities, problems, and therefore you need to collaborate so that you've got this more holistic solution rather than a pinpoint technical answer? The collaboration is really how people go about it. Good leadership is a necessary enabler of that, but it's not the only one, right? So I am a student and a scholar of human behaviors and group dynamics. And that's what, really fascinates me. And, for the last 20 plus years now, I've been trying to figure out what creates the most productive, constructive, innovative dynamics in a group and what stands in the way.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, now that you've been studying collaboration for so long, do you feel like you've, kind of got your arms around it, or are you just scratching the surface, or what? Give me a feel for like how much more research can one do in this area?
So Richard, I will tell you, I never expected to write a second book on the topic.
Uh-huh.
But here's what happened. The first book was very much about why. I was trying to convince people that there was a business case. This is not a soft topic. This is not collegiality and big group hugs.
Yes.
When you're engaging in smarter collaboration, there's some real conflict involved here. There's tough choices to be made. You have to let some people, go from a project who aren't pulling their weight, all of that kind of thing. We were convincing people that this is a hard-edged business necessity, or now in the case of nonprofits, a strategic imperative. And that was, kind of like, tick, okay, we've done that. And it caught on fire, right? My estimate now, I think it's a conservative estimate, is 4 out of 5 law firms that have a law firm strategy have some form of collaboration as one of their main strategic pillars. By and large, any firm worth their salt now is talking about this, but there's been a bandwagon effect. So many people are piling on, and so quickly and without a really strong foundation for it, that there's a lot of mistakes getting made. And so what we observed in the marketplace, and not just in law firms for sure, is that people are falling into collaboration traps. We also observed that, given how many organizations we had worked with and how much we had measured what works and what doesn't, we had a really clear, robust, pragmatic view of what works. And so our motivation to write this second book was to focus on not the why, but the how. And so can we keep studying that? Yes, I think absolutely. Will we write another book? I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what we are doing. We are working now to scale this, because a lot of the ways that we have been delivering not just this message, but the how-tos is through our advisory services at Gardner and Co. I run the firm outside of my Harvard Law School practice and my Harvard Business School teaching. And we've been bringing this to life inside organizations by getting in there and really doing a lot of this work ourselves, collecting the data, analyzing it, interpreting it, helping people figure out what kinds of pilots do we run, how do we measure those, et cetera. That's important work, and God willing, I'll be doing it for quite some time, but I'm a bottleneck, right? Until we perfect cloning, there's only so many of me to go around, and we've trained 150 people in our methodology, and even that isn't enough because it's really high touch and frankly expensive. And so what we want is to bring this idea in a law firm, not just to the exco, not just to management committee, not just to the partners, but we want to make this accessible to people at all stages of their careers and across different roles. And we know that we have to make it cost effective in order to do that. So we're working really hard right now to create some scalable tools, different kinds of sort of classic training tools, but some that are really tech enabled, that are much more affordable on a per head basis. And we hope will embed not just the ideas, but the practices in people's day-to-day operating work.
Well, Heidi, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's so good to see you again. If you do decide to write a third book, please come back and tell me about it.
Would love to do that. Thanks so much for the conversation.
This is Richard Hsu and Heidi Gardner. Thanks.